Hi there and welcome to the fifth part of the UnityFS aircraft tutorial series. In this episode we're going to look at how to take our rigged control surfaces and use them to drive the control surfaces on the actual aircraft mesh to animate them. First of all, let's start by examining our aircraft mesh. There are a few things we're going to need to set up in order for this to work. So first of all, we need to make sure that our aircraft mesh has separate meshes for the ailerons, elevator and rudder. So we can see here that it does. So there's a separate aileron there, a separate elevator there, and a separate rudder. Oops. The second thing we're going to need to check is that all of these objects pivot around sensible locations. So if I select this aileron with Unity set up in local pivot mode, which is where I tend to leave Unity in most of the time, we can now rotate the object around its local pivot. And we can see here that by doing so, the aileron automatically rotates around the correct location. So this is correctly parented with the pivot in the correct place for aileron rotation. Sometimes if you get models off the internet, this pivot won't be in this location. It could be in the center of the aircraft, or it could be somewhere completely different. What you can do to get around this is create an empty game object, position it in the location where the rotation should occur, so in the center of the aileron, aligned with the direction of the aileron, much as this is. You can add it to your model hierarchy, so here next to 157, which is the part, and then you can parent the 157 part to it, or your aileron to your new pivot, and then by rotating the pivot, you'll also be rotating the aileron around the correct axis. So that's a little trick you can use if your ailerons are not correctly pivoted. Ideally, it would be better to use a mesh that has those pivots set up correctly, or if you're making the model yourself, set up the pivots correctly. But if you're using a free model where that's not an option, then that's a nice little trick you can do to make sure that the pivots rotate in the correct point. So now that we know that, if we come back over to our right wing, which is where we've started previously, we can select our control surface, and then you'll notice at the bottom of the control surface there's a visuals box, and in there we have a model we can define, which is the model that will be rotated along with the control surface. So we need to then select this aileron and drag it in there for that to work. So to do that, what I tend to do is, with my wing selected, click on the padlock box up here. Now, what that does, if you're not familiar with the padlock, is it will force the inspector to always stay focused on this object regardless of what I select. So if I click on the ground, you'll see that the inspector doesn't change. If I click on the wing, the inspector doesn't change. So what I can do is click on the aileron here visually to see where it is in here, and then with the inspector still on the control surface, I can drag in my aileron mesh into this models box here, and then uncheck the padlock mode. Now if I reselect my control surface, you can see that the model is in here, and also it's now popped up with the model rotation axis, which is the axis around which the model will rotate to display the aileron rotation. This is now currently set to -1. If I select my aileron again and switch from rotate mode to translate mode, you can see the red axis here is X, so that looks like it probably is going to rotate around the correct axis. Now, if I scroll over to the left-hand side and look at my left wing, you can see that we have our mirrored control surface here, but you'll notice that if I scroll down in this instance, that the mirrored component, although it's mirroring most of the properties, one of the properties it doesn't mirror is the model, and that's because obviously we want to use a separate model on this side. For more information on the mirror component and what it does and does not mirror, you can look at the component reference, which is included in the UnityFS documentation. So what we're going to do on this side is repeat the whole process again. We've got our wing component selected, so we're going to lock it with the padlock, select the aileron, drag that into the model box here. The rotation axis is currently set, and then deselect that. So we're now quickly going to do this for the other two. So we'll do the rudder first. We'll select the rudder here, lock it, select the mesh, and drag it into this box. And we shall select the horizontal stabilizer, lock it, select the mesh, and drag it into the box. Now you'll notice in this instance that although we have two wings effectively for the horizontal stabilizer, there is actually only one mesh for the whole of the horizontal stabilizer. So what we can do is just assign this mesh part 29 to this side and leave the other side blank, and it will still give us the same effect, that the whole surface is moving at once. Now we can select the rudder, part 37, and that one's hooked up as well. So now that we have all of our control surfaces hooked up, we can press the play button, and we can test these one at a time. So if I move the ailerons, if I try and bang left, you can see this one's moving down and this one's moving down, so the model rotation axis here is incorrect. So we'll just change that quickly. So we'll select our wing here, set the model rotation axis to be +1, and try again. And now we can see, if I turn gizmos off, it's easier, that these are rotating correctly. If we try the elevator, we can see that this is rotating in the correct direction. And if I try the rudder, you can see this is rotating around completely the wrong axis. So I'm guessing that's still using X by default. And we probably want to be rotating, if I select the actual mesh, you can see here that it's the Y-axis we want to be rotating around. So we'll select our rudder and then set the visual rotation axis to be Y. If we try that again, we can now see that the rudder is rotating around the correct axis. And if I run this quickly, again, waiting to build up speed until the tail flies. Here we go. We can slowly pull back on the elevator and leave the ground. And now if I use the ailerons, you'll see that they deflect the aircraft left and right. If I use the rudder, I can yaw. And if I use the elevator, I can pitch. If I press C, I can switch back to the cockpit mode, and you'll see that these also work from inside the cockpit. And that's how to hook up control surfaces.